Good morning, Dana Rongione here. Uh, Today I want to talk about when life just doesn't go the way you think it will go, when everything just seems to be going crazy, when you're doing your best to follow the Lord's will and do things according to his plan and you think you're on the right track and on the right path, and then storms come and everything just gets turned upside down and it kind of leaves you questioning, am I doing the right thing? Am I in God's will? Am I doing what he wants me to do? Or have I misunderstood his will somehow and gotten off track? And it just makes us start to doubt ourselves, doubt our direction, doubt the Lord. But today I want to share with you an example in the Bible of a group of men, the disciples, who were following God's will exactly. They were doing exactly what God asked them to do, exactly what they were supposed to do, and they still met a storm. We say we don't believe in the health and wealth mentality that a lot of religions believe. That if you obey Jesus and you do right and everything, that you'll never be sick and you'll never be without money and you'll never face problems. And that's not true. And we say we don't believe that, but then sometimes we act like that's the way things should be. Well, I'm serving Jesus, so I shouldn't have trouble. But Jesus said in John 16:33, in this world ye shall have tribulation. And he was talking to believers. He said, you're going to have trouble, but he goes on to say, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. He reminds us and makes it crystal clear that we will have trouble, but we're not going to go through it alone. And that's what today's story illustrates, is that even though the disciples faced a storm and thought they were facing it alone, at no point were they alone. And I would just want to kind of take this story and just break it down into its pieces and share with you what the Lord has laid on my heart today about facing storms and walking through them with Jesus. So if you'll look with me at Matthew chapter 14, Matthew 14, and we're going to start in verse 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer, it is I. Be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. And when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. It's important to note where this story takes place, okay? It talks about in the first few verses that Jesus was sending away the multitudes. What multitudes? The multitude was the 5,000 men plus women and children that had gathered for the feeding of the 5,000. We all know that story. It's very familiar. I think even people that don't attend church know this story, how the people were there and they were listening to Jesus. And it got late into the day, and the disciples were like, they're hungry, send them home. And Jesus says, no, we'll feed them. And he took one little boy's lunch and fed 5,000 men, plus women and children. So probably somewhere in the ballpark of 1,500 people that day with one little boy's lunch. And not only that, but they took up 12 baskets full to have leftovers. So this story is taking place right on the heels of that. okay? They have just done this. These disciples have just witnessed God work this miracle, okay? Taking this little boy's lunch and multiplying it to feed all these people. And I imagine they took those 12 baskets full and loaded them into this fishing boat that they're in right now. So they have this visible reminder of what Jesus just did, a visible reminder of his power and of the miracles he can do. And yet, in the midst of the storm, it's easy to forget what God's already done in our lives. It's easy to forget that we've seen God do wonderful things, that Jesus can do miracles. It's easy to forget what he's done, whether it be in the Bible times or in our own lives. It's just so easy to forget when we're blinded by the storm. And that's what happened to the disciples. They got in this boat, and Jesus said, "Go to the other side, and I'll meet you on the other side." So they have their command. They have their orders from Jesus, directly from his mouth. Go to the other side, and I'll meet you there. So they were following orders. They weren't out of his will. They weren't doing the wrong thing. They weren't doing a bad thing. They were doing exactly what he said. And did Jesus know there was a storm coming? Absolutely, because he's God and he knows everything. But he used this opportunity to teach his disciples and to remind them that he could be trusted. So they're in the boat, they start their way rowing across, and I don't know how far they get. The Bible says they're in the midst of the sea. So that could be right smack dab in the middle. They could have just gotten out. They could be very close to the other side. I don't know. They're in the midst of the sea, and a storm hits. And these are seasoned fishermen. I'm sure they've been in storms before. But the way that the Bible puts it, it just makes it seem like this storm was extraordinarily bad. It was just a horrendous storm. And it says that, basically telling us about the timelines, these disciples were rowing for about 9 hours. Now, geography-wise, looking at things and whatever, it shouldn't take that long to go from one side to the other. But they were still in the midst of the sea, and they had been rowing for 9 hours. And despite all that effort, all that time rowing and rowing and rowing, it was like they were getting nowhere. You know, for every little bit they got forward, the wind and the rain and the waves would push them backward. They'd go forward and they'd get pushed backward. And if ever there was a good illustration of what it feels like when storms hit in life, that's it. I don't know if you've been there. I'm sure you have. I'm sure we've all been there. The past several months for us and our ministry and our personal lives and everything has been just like that. We've taken a step forward and then pushed about 3 steps back. And we've taken a step forward and then pushed 3 steps back. And it can be very frustrating and very tiring because you feel like you're trying so hard to do what the Lord wants you to do, but something's fighting you. Something's fighting against you, and it's pushing you back more and more all the time. And it's making it harder to do the things that you're trying to do, which are already difficult. So that's what the disciples were facing. They were facing this storm and these contrary winds to where they were trying to go forward and it was just pushing them back. And I'm sure they were afraid. I'm sure they were exhausted. I'm sure they were frustrated. And we all know what it feels like to be that way, to have just put forth so much effort and just feel like you're not getting anywhere. But it's not over yet. The story is not over yet. And they will get to the other side just like we will. So as they're rowing and rowing and rowing and fighting to do what the Lord asked them to do, suddenly they see Jesus walking on the water. Now, during this time, this 9 hours, if you noticed in the passage that we read, Jesus said to the disciples to go to the other side while I send the multitudes away. He didn't say anything about going up to the mountain to pray. All he told them was that he was going to send the multitudes away. Well, how long does that take? Not 9 hours. So I'm sure if I were one of the disciples anyway, during that 9 hours of fighting, I would be asking the question, where's Jesus? Why isn't he here? Doesn't he care that we're going through this storm? Why isn't he here with us? Why is he making us go through this alone? Because he didn't say where he was going. He didn't say he was going up to the mountain to pray. And I have no doubt on that mountain, he was praying for them, that they would have faith and that they would believe. But he didn't tell them that. And you know what? God doesn't always tell us what he's doing. He doesn't always make his will clear to us. He doesn't make his plans known to us. He just gives us directions and expects us to obey them, even though we don't have the whole picture. And that takes faith. It definitely takes faith. And then sometimes when the storms get really rough, we start to doubt that faith. We start to question, okay, is God being cruel? Is God trying to teach me a lesson? Has he forgotten about me and he's just too busy with everybody else? What is going on? Where is God during this time? Where is God during my storm? And I'm sure the disciples the Bible doesn't say that, but they're human. And I know me as a human, when I'm going through these storms, particularly these storms that just don't seem to have an end. They just go on, and I'm tired and I'm weary of fighting. And it's getting harder and harder to keep pressing. During those times, I know I have found myself on more than one occasion questioning, Lord, where are you? Where are you? But Jesus was there. He was there with them. He knew what they were going through. And then he made himself known to them as he walked on the water toward them. And the funny thing is sometimes, let's just like the disciples, when Jesus does make his presence known, because we've been asking, where are you, Jesus? Where are you? And Jesus says, I'm right here. Then we go, it's a ghost, like the disciples did. Jesus came walking on the water toward them. They were wondering where he was. Here he is. But they don't believe it's him. And that's just a good insight into what we face when we go through storms, how sometimes we don't recognize what Jesus is doing and what God is doing in our lives. We don't recognize, because we're so blinded by the storm, we don't recognize the blessings that he sends or the help he sends or the extra strength that he sends. We're so focused on the problem. We're blinded to these other things and we don't recognize them as God. We don't recognize them as help from him. Just like the disciples, like I said, they didn't see that Jesus was Jesus. They just saw this form walking on the water and they freaked out. It's a ghost, it's a ghost, it's a spirit. And Jesus called to them, be not afraid. Be of good cheer. It's okay. Don't freak out. It's just me. And he just wanted to calm their hearts. And God does that with us as well. Sometimes he calms the storm. Sometimes he calms our heart and calms our mind and calms us in the midst of the storm. And that's what Jesus was trying to do. He was trying to calm. The storm was still raging. The waves were still crashing. The thunder was still rolling. The lightning was still flashing. As far as I know, the rain was still pouring. But Jesus said, be of good cheer. I'm here with you. You are not alone. And that personally is my favorite Bible promise, is that God will never leave us or forsake us. Even when we can't sense his presence, even when we don't realize he's there, we have his promise that he is always, always with us. And that is such huge, huge blessing. Such a huge blessing. So here he comes, and when they see him and he speaks to them, then they're like, okay, could this be Jesus? So Peter, ever the bold one, ever the one to speak out, says, if it's really you, Lord, let me walk on the water and come to you. Now, I've been in a boat, not a whole lot of times, but I've been in a boat. Probably the longest time I spent on a boat was when my husband and I went on a cruise with his parents several years ago. And it was a 7-day cruise. So 7 days on the boat. And the first 6 days were actually quite wonderful. We had really good food. We played games. We watched movies. We just walked around the boat. It was great. And the sea was so calm that you didn't really feel like you were on a boat. It just felt normal. But on that last day, a storm hit and everything changed. All of a sudden, we knew we were on a boat. It was harder to walk because the boat was shifting. My stomach did not handle the waves particularly well. I got quite seasick, and I spent the whole day trying to take my mind off the fact that I felt so sick, but nothing I did helped because no matter where you went on the ship, you could see the water rising and falling and rising and falling, and the whole boat was, you couldn't go anywhere to get still. And I can remember how miserable I felt. Not so much that I was scared at that point in time because the storm wasn't that bad, but it was bad enough that I just wanted to find someplace still to lay down, just get feeling better. I remember feeling so horrible. During that time, the last thing I would have thought to ask was to get out of the boat and walk on the water. The storm was rough enough. It was rocking the boat. Big boat. What would it do to me? So Peter, I don't know if it was boldness or stupidity or if he was, I don't know. It's Peter. I can't speak for him, but somehow he decides, and we have to give him credit here, that he would be safer out of the boat with Jesus than in the boat without him. Let me say that again because this is powerful. Peter realized he was safer outside of the boat with Jesus than in the boat without him. Sometimes it is hard to step out of the boat. We want those safety nets. We want those comfort zones. We want those things that make us feel safe. I remember another opportunity I had to be in a boat, and this one was less enjoyable. We were leaders. Jason and I were leaders of our youth group, and we took them whitewater rafting in North Carolina. And I had never been whitewater rafting before. And those of you who know me, you know I am not the adventurous type. Thrill seeking is not, I want to sit and read a book in the quiet place. This was not my idea of fun. But we knew the kids would enjoy it, so we took them. And we were going through all the preliminaries where, the guides would teach you how to do everything, how to sit in the boat, how to stay in the boat, how to hold your oar and all of that. And the first thing we found out was, like I said, how to sit in the boat. And I realized, or I learned, you don't sit in the boat. You sit on the boat. You actually sit on the edge of your raft. And you tuck your feet in this little section in the middle to help secure yourself so you don't topple out. But you actually sit on the side of the boat. I think if I had known that ahead of time, we would have picked a different activity. The thought tipping out of that boat and being in that water terrified me. One, the water was freezing. But two, it just went against everything that my need for security and comfort screamed for. That was out of my comfort zone. That was beyond what I felt comfortable doing. But sometimes Jesus asks us to do things that are outside of our comfort zone. He asks us to do things that are contrary to what we would think of doing or what we would want to do or what even makes sense to us. I mean, in a storm, get out of the boat. Now, granted, Jesus didn't ask Peter, Peter asked Jesus, but it was a show of faith on Peter's part because he realized that he needed to make that move. And Jesus commended him for that by saying, "Come on, come on, you want to come with me? Come with me." Peter did. Now, I don't blame the rest of the disciples for just staying in the boat. I do commend Peter for getting out. I very much commend him because, like I said, I don't think I would have. But he gets out and he starts walking on the water, walking toward Jesus. Now, I don't know how far he walked. I don't know how far away Jesus was at this point. The Bible doesn't make that clear. I don't know if Peter walked 4 steps or 40 steps. I'm not sure. But the fact is, he got out of the boat in the midst of the storm and he walked on the water toward Jesus. But then Peter did what we often do when we're facing life storms. We get distracted. We get distracted by the storms. Even when we've decided, okay, we're in a storm, Jesus said that was going to happen. It doesn't mean that I'm outside of his will. It doesn't mean that I'm doing the wrong thing. Jesus said this would happen, that we would have trials, we would have tribulation. So I'm going to make peace with that. I am going to just continue doing what God asked me to do. And I'm not going to fret about it. I'm not going to freak out about it. And we make that little mental plan. This is what I'm going to do. And sometimes we do it for 4 steps or 40 steps. But then the storm gets worse. Or we think the storm's going to let up. It doesn't. Or we just get tired. I don't know. Lots of different things. The point is, we get distracted by the storm, just like Peter did. He was focused on Jesus, eyes on Jesus, walking toward Jesus, and then he started looking around. Here in Wales, the scenery is beautiful, and it's very hard to actually drive anywhere in Wales. 1, because the roads are very windy and they're very narrow, but 2, because the scenery is so beautiful, it's distracting. You want to look around at the scenery and see all the things that there are to see. You want to see the sheep, you want to see the hills, you want to see this and that. But the problem is if you're looking over here, all of a sudden you're not driving this way anymore. You start veering that way. And if you're looking over here, the car starts veering that way. When we're not looking where we're going, we get off track. And that's what happened with Peter in the storm. He stopped looking at Jesus and he started looking at the storm and he got off track. And while he didn't necessarily veer this way or that way, he started going down. He started going down and he started sinking. And again, I don't know how far he sank, if it was just down to his ankles, down to his knees, if he was all the way down to his chin. All I know is the Bible says he started to sink and he cried out, "Lord, help! Lord, help!" Sometimes we think for our prayers to be effective, they need to be these long, drawn out, very formal prayers, with all these eloquent words. And the Bible does tell us that we need to pour out our hearts to God. And it does tell us that we need to pray for others and that we need to worship the Lord and that we do need to pray for, intercessory prayer for ourselves. And it does tell us all these things to give thanks. So it takes time to do all of that. But if we're doing that daily in our daily prayer time, then every other time we stop to pray doesn't have to be this long, drawn out. If we're praying in public or if we're praying for a meal or if we're in a situation where all we have time to get out is, "Lord, help." if we've been in connection with the Lord and we've been keeping up with our daily prayer time, we're kind of caught up, where we need to be in our relationship with the Lord. That's all we have to say. We don't have to go through these long drawn out prayers every time we need something from the Lord. We can just say, Lord, help. And let me tell you, there have been times, not so much that I didn't have the time to pray a long prayer, but I didn't have the words for a long prayer. There have been times that I have been so burdened about something, so engulfed in the darkness, that all I could pray was, Lord, help. Lord, help me. I didn't have anything else I could say. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what I really needed at the time. So all I could say was, Lord, help. And that's what Peter said, Lord, help me. And it was enough because Jesus reached down and he pulled him out. He pulled him up out of the waves. And he said, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? And I don't think Jesus was doing it as a way of berating Peter, but just kind of a reminder that, Peter, you were doing it. You were walking on the water. You were coming to me. Why did you look away? Why did you stop? I think he was just trying to direct Peter's attention back to where he got off track. And Jesus does that out of love, not out of anger, not out of, I told you so. I'm so disappointed in you. But it's out of love because he doesn't want us to sink. He doesn't want us to get overwhelmed with the situation. He doesn't want us to lose out to our tribulation or to get so overwhelmed and discouraged by it that we stop serving him altogether. Instead, he points us to that moment where we messed up, that moment where we started to doubt, that moment where we lost faith, that moment when we got our eyes off of him. And he said, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? And of course, he walks with him to the ship, and they both get in the ship. And the minute Jesus is in the ship, everything's fine. The seas are calm, the winds are calm, the rain ceased, the storm stopped, everything was calm. And the disciples marvel. They marvel. And I have to wonder, remember I talked about how this was up at the tail end of the feeding of the 5,000. I have to wonder, those baskets full of fish and bread that they had left over, I have to wonder where those were. If they were somewhere in sight, where they could kind of keep looking over and say, God did that, he can help us. Jesus did that, he can help us. Jesus did a miracle, he can do miracles. Or if they were tucked away out of sight to where they couldn't be that reminder. I think that's why it's important to keep like a blessings book or a prayer journal where we can go back and see the things that God has done for us. We can write those things down, the way he's answered prayer, the way he met a special need, the way he came through when we didn't even know we needed him to come through. By keeping track of those things and keeping a journal of those things, it helps keep those things in our mind and in our focus when we start thinking, nothing ever works out right for me. Or it's just been one trial after another. I leave one storm and I come into another storm. Or we start wondering, where is God? We can look at our journal, our blessing book, whatever you have that you want to use, and we can say, there he is. There he is. There he is. And we can remember that God came through for us then. Maybe not exactly when we thought he would or should, and not exactly in the way we thought he would or could. But he did come through and everything worked out, and we're still here and we're still going and we're still serving. Sometimes we can see the blessing side of it, how it worked for our good. Sometimes we're still left to question, I don't get how that was good. But we got through it and we're on the other side of it. So yes, while we may have had to go through the storm at least God got us through the storm, and He was with us in the storm. And so these are the things that I learned from this story here. So many different things about just knowing, one, that just because we're facing a storm doesn't mean that we're out of God's will. Now, yes, sometimes God does use trials to get us back on track if we are out of His will, but a storm does not necessarily mean that we're out of God's will. The disciples were in God's will. They were doing what Jesus commanded them to do. And then the reminder that sometimes when we're going and we're going and we're rowing and we're trying and things just don't seem to be working out, to remember that we're not alone. We're not alone. Jesus is giving us the strength to keep going, to get through. And when we're asking ourselves, where is God? Where is Jesus? Why isn't He here? I don't see Him working. Those are the times that we need to just trust His character and trust His promises, because we can't necessarily see what He's doing. A lot of times Jesus works behind the scenes, and we don't get to see what He's doing. But the Bible tells us He is working all things for our good and for His glory. And we have to just trust during those times when we can't see. The disciples couldn't see Him, but they could trust. They could trust. And then, of course, there's the lesson of Peter stepping out in faith. Sometimes stepping out means going out of our comfort zones, out of what makes us feel right, what makes us feel good. Sometimes God asks us to do, but we need to keep our eyes on Him so that, one, if He wants us to go a different direction, we know which direction to go, but also so that we are leaning on His strength and His grace and His guidance, not our own. So keep your eyes on the Lord. I don't know what storms you may be walking through today. Like I said, I know we all face storms. Sometimes it's a storm here and a storm there. Sometimes it feels like it's storm after storm after storm after storm, or just one long, non-ending storm. But whatever it is, we can walk through those storms with Jesus, knowing that we're never alone, that if we know we're in His will, that we can just keep going and keep doing what He's asked us to do. And just keep trusting that He will work all things out in the end, and walk with Him in faith, trusting that the storm will pass. It may not be when and how we want it to, but it will pass. And in the end, we'll probably be a lot better off for it.